Anybody who's friends with Jill Wine-Banks is friends with us. And Barbara McQuade and Jill do a podcast called Sisters-in-Law, where they have fun and explain things to folks like me. Barbara's also a professor of law at the University of Michigan. She was U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan, but you know her from cable news, where she is always a voice of reason when it comes to what's going on legally in our country. She has a new book out. It's called Attack from Within, How Disinformation is Sabotaging America. I'm very pleased to welcome Barbara McQuade to our show. Barbara, how are you today?
I am well, Joan. Thank you so much for having me. Really glad to be with you.
I'm really glad to be able to talk to you, too. Jill joins us on this radio station all the time. And I apologize. It never occurred to me to reach out to the other sisters-in-law just because I've known Jill for so very long.
Well, Jill is a legend, so we understand.
You know, I want to get right into the book because one of the earlier chapters, when you're first talking about disinformation, you talk about a bunch of different examples of disinformation in the world of politics. And we've, sadly, I think, all kind of gotten used to that. Oh, you said this. No, I didn't say that. You did this. No, I didn't do that. But I have to say that even though I'm steeped in all this stuff, and I should probably be more resilient here, I was really shocked at the disinformation that is surrounding this crisis, this natural disaster we're seeing when it comes to the flooding. And I'm sorry, most of everything that I've seen has come from a Republican saying that, you know, money's not available, that the disaster money that should be going to North Carolina is going to immigrant communities. I mean, the disinformation and misinformation is staggering. And yet it has taken root to such an extent that the local officials on the ground have spent valuable time trying to tell everybody it isn't true. I am shocked at the depth of the bad behavior here. Barbara, are you?
I really am. I find it really despicable in the face of a natural disaster, an emergency that's killed more than 231 people. People have lost their homes, that they would use this moment to spread falsehoods simply to gain political advantage. And, you know, it seems to me that the goal is to criticize the Biden-Harris administration, that FEMA has botched the response in some way, also using the false claim that funds have been diverted from emergency relief to housing immigrants who are here unlawfully. All of it untrue. In fact, it is so extreme that FEMA had to put up a web page on its website debunking these false claims. And what is really tragic about it is that people will hear these false claims, they will read these false claims, and they'll believe it. And it will have a couple of impacts. One is people who need this relief will not apply for it because they believe it's unavailable. There have been false claims that relief is limited to $750. False. $750 is sort of an upfront. What if you need it in an emergency for food or shelter or medicine, you can get it immediately. But there is no limit on other things you can get if you have a legitimate claim for your home and other things. And so people may not apply for need they really do need. And then the other thing is everybody else who's watching this and listening to this will lose confidence in our government and our ability to help people in times of a crisis. And so it is done, I believe, for short-term political gain, but can really have a long-term harm on society as a consequence.
And that's the thing that is really worrisome. You know, I'm a big fan of Timothy Snyder's books, you know, on tyranny, on freedom. And he points out the things that have to happen for tyranny, fascism, dictatorship to take root. And one of the planks is this belief that there are no facts, that there is no truth anymore.
Yeah, and it's one of the things I've heard, when you write a book about disinformation, the disinformers are going to come for you. So I've experienced that a little bit. And one of the questions I get from people who are critics is, who decides what's true? Who decides what are facts?
Oh, my God.
Are you the fact police? Yeah, isn't that so interesting? Or arguing that anyone who fact checks is engaging in censorship. And I come from a background as a prosecutor where facts matter in a court of law. There are actual facts. Was the light red or was the light green? Sometimes there are shades of gray. Maybe it was yellow. But we can agree on what those facts were. We can establish what facts are. And then, of course, we can all have our own opinion or interpretation of those facts. But there is such a thing as a verifiable fact. And I think this idea that there are no facts is part of what you're talking about there. In Putin's Russia, one of the goals is to spout conflicting claims all the time and convince people that, who knows, to become very cynical. You can't believe anything anyone in politics says. And so really you should just throw up your hands and disengage from politics altogether, because they're all a bunch of crooks and nothing we do or say can make any difference. That is the antithesis of democracy. Of course we can make a difference, but we do have to agree on facts so that we can argue of what our policy preferences are. And I think those who want to defeat the concept of truth or facts just want to muddy the waters so much that we lose our agency in decision making.
There is a local anchor and reporter in Colorado called Kyle Clark, and I played something he posted on social media quite a while ago, and he said, we are going to bring you facts. We are going to say this happened, this is true. You are going to be able to count on the fact that what we tell you actually happened and is real. Now, what you choose as a viewer or listener choose to do with that, that's up to you, and that's where opinion comes in. But we are going to bring you the facts. And the other thing, there was a woman who posted on, I don't know which one of the platforms recently, and she was talking about our mainstream media. And she said it's like you've got one candidate saying the sky is green, one candidate saying the sky is blue, and as a reporter, you're just saying that. That's your article. Well, so-and-so says it's green, so-and-so says it's blue. She goes, why don't you get up off your chair, walk outside, and look at the sky and say, so-and-so says it's green, so-and-so says it's blue, but I just walked out and looked at the sky, and it is blue. And that second part seems to be lacking from some of our media coverage today. And I think it just feeds right into disinformation.
Yes, I think that the media is still struggling to figure out how to cover politicians who are willing to lie so blatantly in our faces, and how to cover the world when sometimes the news is driven by what we see on social media. And I think that, they come up in this tradition of telling both sides of a story and being balanced, and that's sufficient. But I think it's not in this day and age. I think they do need to engage in some independent fact-checking so that they can expose people when they are engaging in lies. This awful lie about Haitian immigrants eating cats and dogs in Springfield, Ohio. Incredibly harmful. And, the mainstream media, I think, is stuck in a position of, on the one hand, do we ignore this story because we don't want to amplify it, and you have people casually read a headline and believe it to be true? Or on the other hand, do we run this story so that people can see the absurdity and the awfulness of the claims? And I think it's a hard call. I remember when Nancy Pelosi's husband was struck with a hammer in their home in a horrible attack. And there were people like Elon Musk and Donald Trump Jr. who were making really awful jokes about it. And I think the mainstream media was, couldn't figure out, do you report this? And some did. Donald Trump Jr. and Elon Musk said the following, just awful things. They said it was newsworthy because these noteworthy people said it. On the other hand, if you amplify those claims, people will read it, and some will assume it's true. And so I think our media is still adjusting to how to report things accurately and helpfully in a world where there is so much disinformation.
Yeah. And you also in the book make the point that part of the reason why these disinformation efforts are so successful is sometimes less to do with us assessing whether or not it's true, but us reacting to how it makes us feel. I'm reminded of Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson, who I'm sure you've heard not that long ago, said that he was almost completely positive that the Great Depression was an inside job. He didn't have any facts. He didn't have any proof, but it felt right to him. It just felt like something that was true. And honestly, I don't know what you do with that.
Yeah. Well, I know Gabriel Sterling, who was a Georgia election official, a Republican, but who was pushing back against the false claims of a stolen election there. And he said very similar words, that when you ask people, why do you believe this? What evidence do you have? And it's not really knowledge, it's more of a feeling. And it is, and people who traffic in disinformation prey upon that. They appeal to the heart, they appeal to fear, they appeal to conspiracy theories. And so we may not have all the facts, but what they're saying makes some sense. We also have, and I talk about this in the book a little bit, cognitive forces, and people who are manipulators know how to use those cognitive forces against us. It's really some of the same techniques that advertisers use. But fear and repetition and brands and confirmation bias, knowing that we are inclined to believe things that support our worldview. And so if you are someone who is fearful of immigrants, then if I stoke those fears by talking about how some of them are criminals and this one was a rapist and they're opening the prisons and letting them in, people who have that fear already are going to find that to be a very persuasive argument. And so it appeals, I think, to the worst in us instead of the best in us. It is a strategy for division and not unity. And I think the best leaders bring people together and don't tear them apart. But unfortunately, we've got people willing to tear us apart in favor of their own personal gain.
And what really makes me extremely sad, it's one thing for Donald Trump or maybe even J.D. Vance to say ridiculous, untrue things. They've got a means to an end. They see this as a way to win an election. But they would not succeed if it weren't for the enablers, the Lindsey Grahams, the Kellyanne Conways, who bolster these arguments and go on cable news shows and talk like these aren't lies, even though I know they're a lie. Lindsey Graham knows it's a lie. Kellyanne Conway knows it's a lie. But it's the party line. Those are the people, to me, that I find particularly despicable.
Yes, I have to agree with you. And, we've seen this become the party line, and people are putting their own political careers ahead of the best interests of the country because they see what happens when you call out Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and others for their lies. I mean, look at Liz Cheney, who was purged by her party, lost her primary election. She was censured by the House for daring to call out what Donald Trump did, for chairing the Senate or the House committee investigating the January 6th attack, for voting in favor of impeachment over the January 6th attack. Really despicable. Same with Adam Kinzinger. Jeff Flake left the Senate because of attacks by Donald Trump. And so it is astonishing, and it's sad. When you think back to Watergate, when we had a president who did things wrong, it was members of his own party who said, you will be impeached, you will be convicted, you need to step down.
They didn't go out in front of the television cameras and say, Richard Nixon is being unfairly pilloried and we have to, stand by him and circle the wagons. No. They went to Nixon. When Barry Goldwater went to Nixon and said, I personally am going to vote to basically kick you to the curb. And it was over.
Yes, and Nixon, for all of his warts, had the character to resign, to say, I don't want to put myself or the country through this. I'm going to step down. Can you imagine those circumstances today? Donald Trump would be defiant and say everybody's lying and it's a witch hunt and it's a hoax and all kinds of other things. And I think one of the things, Joan, that is so concerning about this moment is how many people are willing to go along with the con. The people that you've named, I think about Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, who voted against certification of the election on January 6th.
Marco Rubio.
Know better. Yeah, but they're willing to go along with the con and be part of this team, this us versus them idea that rather than thinking about where we can compromise and where we can get together as a country, it is straight down division down party lines and clinging to our own tribes. And that may be an effective way to campaign, to, cast these lines as war and try to get voters excited to increase voter turnout. But it is no way to govern. Right. Governing, of course, requires nuance and compromise. It requires people to be mature, respectful. And instead, we get things like a proposal for an immigration bill by a Republican that gets rejected because Donald Trump says, I'd rather have that issue to argue about in the election than actually solve that problem. So, maybe winning the campaigns is his measure of success. But to me, the right measure of success is lifting up our country.
Before we get to the part of Barbara's book, the book is called Attack from Within. Before we get to the part where she offers a path forward, I want to tell you that you have a chance to see and hear her here in Chicago. Monday, October 21st, she's going to be at the Union League Club of Chicago for a luncheon, and where she is going to be talking about disinformation. Again, that's Monday, October 21st. It's at the Union League Club of Chicago. And you have to buy a ticket, but I'm pretty sure, having gone to one of these things before, that there's a lunch involved. So it's, and it's not that expensive. So contact the Union League Club. Is there do you have a personal website where people can also get tickets for this, or should I just send them to the Union League Club?
Right to the Union League Club. Their website is the best place to go.
Okie dokie. Now
I've posted it on X as well, so if people care to look there, and I'm at Barb McQuade.
Okay. It bothered me that Chapter 9, where you start to talk about turning this cruise ship around, you have a quote that starts every chapter, and the quote you picked for this one was the one from John Kennedy: "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do other things not because they are easy, but because they are hard." That's not what we want to hear, Barbara McQuade. We want to hear something easy we can do to put ourselves on the road to recovery. But I'll take whatever you've got.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be easy, and I don't think there's going to be one solution. I think it's going to require a number of different solutions to get us where we want to be. So on the one hand, I think there are some things we can do from a regulatory and legal perspective to mitigate the harm, maybe not eliminate it altogether, and things that don't violate the First Amendment. I know sometimes people say anything you do to regulate social media companies will violate the First Amendment, because I'm not talking about going after content. I think we can do things with regulation of the algorithms, which choose which content rises to the top of our feeds. I think we can do some things to protect our private data online so that we can minimize the way we are micro-targeted for ads from commercial entities as well as political campaigns that have bought our data from data brokers. I think there are things we can do to reduce the number of bots online that are amplifying false claims and picking fights with us if we express anything on particular issues. So that's all sort of from the supply of disinformation side. I think we can also do some things from the demand side. One is to increase our own media literacy so that we are less likely to fall for these claims when they're posted online, or when we read about them in the media, or when we hear them from politicians. In Finland, where they've been bombarded by disinformation from Russia for generations, they have introduced media literacy into their schools with great success. I think that's something we could do here, and not just for children, but for adults too, through all kinds of places where we can engage in lifelong learning: community colleges, libraries, faith communities, civic organizations, and others. But I think the real linchpin to all of this is leadership by our public officials and leadership by all of us to want to get to the truth. I think that we are all too willing to dunk on our opponents and to identify with our tribes and willing to go along with this con if it suits our purposes. Now, I do think that at this moment in American history, the greatest purveyors of disinformation are the far-right MAGA extremists of the Republican Party. But it's not a tool that is limited to one party. Anybody can use it. And I think we've even seen, some examples of this in the Democratic Party. I mean, people who were pushing the claim that Joe Biden still possessed the mental acuity to serve another 4 terms in office. I think that was some disinformation. People who are piling on and joining in on the J.D. Vance couch jokes, which we know were made up. Those bring down the level of civil discourse because it pits us in this sort of us versus them idea that I'm going to get a cheap shot in at you and I'm going to own you. Instead, I think that we need to care more about unity and care more about our country than we care about winning. And that's difficult when the stakes are as high as they are today. In this election, I think they're particularly high, and I think that one candidate in particular is historically unfit to serve. Because of the way he traffics in disinformation. But I think that as we go forward, we have to care more about the truth and facts and accuracy than we do about winning the moment or having a particularly clever post on social media or bumper sticker. We have to do the hard work to get past those things so that we're actually talking to each other and listening and discussing the facts that should make a difference in our policy decisions.
One of the things you mention is the fairness doctrine. I remember there was a quote attributed to Rush Limbaugh where he said that if the fairness doctrine hadn't been done away with, he never would have become as famous as he did because he could say anything and be as outrageous as he wanted to be and never have to worry about any fairness or any balance. And he was very open about who he was. I read an article on him that said, when he first became really famous with all of his hate and anger, Republicans came to him and they were like, "Oh my God, we're so glad you're on our side. Let's talk about some of the issues we want you to discuss." And he was like, I don't care about you. I don't care about your issues. I care about audience. I care about being the biggest radio show in the country. And I'm not particularly in your corner. I am just in my corner, and anything that I can stir people up about, that's what I'm going. And supposedly they went away very sad because they thought that, that they had a Republican voice they could count on to spew the party line. And he was like, no, you don't understand. I just care about audience, and I get the most audience when I get them angry and riled up, and that's what I'm about.
So interesting. And, you are right that his emergence coincides with the end of the fairness doctrine. It really kind of invented rage radio during the Reagan administration when he decided that it should not be enforced any longer out of concerns that it violated the First Amendment to tell broadcast media what they had to put on the air, which was both sides of an issue. And so it allowed people like Rush Limbaugh to just go on and spew his venom without any voice in response to refute what he was saying. But so interesting that all he cared about was ratings. It seems like he and the former president have that affinity in common.
Doesn't it?
But it is an interesting issue, and I think that now that we have multiple outlets with podcasts and social media and cable television, the fairness doctrine is probably obsolete because it related to a scarce bandwidth for television and radio. But I do think that the equal time rule is something that still exists that ought to be applied to political advertising online, because that is what causes us, if you ever watch the 6 o'clock news, you will see an ad for Kamala Harris and followed immediately by an ad for Donald Trump or vice versa. And that's because of the equal time doctrine, which says if you accept money for ads from one party, you have to accept it from their opponent so that they get equal airtime. That's not true on social media, where you might be bombarded with ads from one particular party. And so a way around that would be perhaps to, if you see an ad from one candidate, you will also see an ad from their opponent so that you get that equal time online as well. I think it might be one way for us to get out of our social media bubbles that cause us to live in a bit of an echo chamber.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more, and that is what I always tell people who call into this radio show. Don't let anything, even my very informative, very entertaining radio show, don't let anything be your single source of information. That's the safest way to know what the truth is. Barbara McQuade is going to be at the Union League Club Monday, October 21st for a luncheon. She will be talking about disinformation, which is also the subject of her book, Attack from Within, How Disinformation is Sabotaging America. Barbara, thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure.
Oh, thank you, Joan. My pleasure to be on with you. Thank you.